Far beyond the limits of public maps and casual memory, a shadow world of decaying architecture waits in the freezing dark. These are the forbidden outposts and classified ruins that history tried to bury. Structures swallowed by creeping permafrost, crushed beneath shifting glaciers, or poisoned by the very secrets they were engineered to conceal. Official records that still surface hint at rapid evacuations and colossal structural failures, leaving behind silent, untouched tableaus of sudden collapse. We are about to cross into 10 of the most isolated and unsettling abandoned sites on Earth. As we descend deeper into the wasteland, we will eventually uncover a carbonized facility where the Arctic wind screams at sub-zero temperatures outside, yet the ash-choked hallways remain suffocatingly hot, bleeding hissing sulfuric steam from a fractured Earth. Step past the perimeter wire as we count down the places humanity left behind to die. Number 10 is Pyramiden. This Soviet mining settlement stands intact at the edge of the Arctic Circle. Inside the cultural center, a grand piano waits on a silent stage. Library books remain neatly stacked on wooden shelves, and the dining hall tables are still arranged exactly as they were left. The calendar on the main administration desk marks the final day of operation in October 1998. Today, the avenues sit empty, but this complex was originally engineered as a flawless socialist utopia to project Soviet superiority in the high Arctic. Planners carved a self-sustaining architectural marvel into the permafrost, blending industrial coal extraction with heavy ideological display. Ships hauled tons of mainland topsoil across the ocean simply to cultivate a central lawn against the polar wind. That imported earth remains perfectly preserved beneath the snow, and a massive stone bust of Lenin still faces the glacier. In August 1996, Flight 2801 slammed into the nearby Operafjellet mountain. Norwegian aviation records confirm all 141 passengers and crew perished. That localized grief, tangling with a broader post-Soviet economic freefall, broke the settlement's operational logic. By early 1998, the remaining residents were ordered out almost overnight, leaving behind a surreal, untouched tableau. Today, dried plants sit in windowsill pots, and sheet music remains perfectly arranged on the grand piano in the cultural center. The communal dining hall remains perfectly untouched. Inside the cavernous room, the extreme Arctic cold functions as an environmental vacuum seal, arresting decay and holding the space exactly as left. Heavy chairs sit pushed back from the aisles, while thick glass salt shakers stand upright on the long wooden countertops. Because the ambient moisture crystallized instantly upon the heating grid's final shutdown, the exposed stainless steel cutlery lacks a single speck of rust. Number 9. Camp Century. The surface of the Greenland ice sheet is saturated with meltwater, pooling into dark, metallic-looking lakes that drain downward. As the permafrost softens, the once stable glacier is leaching cold runoff, slowly stripping away the frozen buffer that conceals a sprawling, subterranean military complex. The engineered structural perimeter now sits just tens of meters beneath a thinning crust of fractured ice. Beneath the silent weight of the glacier, metallic corridors sit in absolute darkness. This top-secret subterranean military base was engineered to house a portable nuclear reactor and launch missiles directly through the ice. The frozen architecture is in motion. According to declassified engineering summaries, the glacier shifts significantly faster than anticipated, grinding against the perimeter. Millions of tons of creeping ice bear down on the subterranean grid, warping the metallic ribs of the main trenches. This relentless pressure threatens a structural failure, one that risks breaching containment and leaching a toxic load into the deep meltwater. The steel walls buckle inward by measurable inches each year. Beneath 100 feet of solid ice, pools of chemical coolant remain perfectly liquid. When the military evacuated, they sealed radioactive waste and raw diesel directly into the trench system. Now, as the glacier subtly degrades, this entombed toxic load is migrating. Saturated meltwater channels carve new pathways through the dark, carrying the heavy metallic runoff outward. The contaminated fluid currently tracks along the subglacial bedrock, moving steadily toward the open ocean. Number 8 is DYE2, a mechanical monolith lost in the sheer white. The abandoned radar station balances on massive steel columns, completely inaccessible across the desolate Greenland ice sheet. Today it is an empty shell suspended above the ice. But this structure was once the nervous system of a global standoff. It operated as a critical node in the distant early warning line, built to detect Soviet nuclear bombers crossing the North Pole. Crews lived entirely within this vertical isolation, generating their own heat while maintaining the massive sensors. The radar arrays were calibrated to secure exactly 15 minutes of advance notice before a strike. The obsolescence arrived almost overnight. According to declassified Air Force summaries, the deployment of orbital surveillance satellites, combined with the rapid fracturing of the Soviet state, stripped the facility of its primary purpose. The sheer face of the radar dome, once a multi-million-dollar shield, became merely an inaccessible relic with no road home. In the autumn of 1988, the final crews packed their personal gear, severed the diesel generators, and began their descent to the coast. A thick layer of frost coats a half-empty coffee mug resting on a recreation table. Deep inside the inaccessible dome, the break room remains a bizarrely intact diorama of an interrupted shift. Heavy winter jackets hang on their designated pegs, while dog-eared 1980s magazines lie fanned out beside ashtrays. The human warmth of this suspended outpost plummeted to sub-zero the moment the power was severed. 4 pairs of insulated boots sit perfectly aligned beneath the rack. Number 7. The Thule Air Base Crash Site. The digital coordinates were scrubbed from public registries, leaving only a white, featureless expanse on modern satellite grids where topography officially ceased to exist. On paper, the incident was closed and the landscape deleted. Yet beneath the freezing winds, the physical reality ignores the administrative blank space. Walk across this sector with a dosimeter, and the needle still spikes erratically over random patches of crusted snow. 24 hours a day, B-52 bombers traced identical holding patterns above the Arctic, flying under a mission charter that would later be quietly revoked. This was Operation Chrome Dome, an unrelenting logistical loop designed to keep thermonuclear payloads continuously airborne. The flat paths were meticulously logged, turning the polar grid into an administrative staging ground for mutually assured destruction. The operational ledgers required at least one fully armed aircraft in the stratosphere at all times. The operational loop broke in 1968. Here's what most people never hear about this specific flight. The failure began with a localized cabin fire, forcing a blind descent toward the ice. According to declassified Department of Defense summaries, the resulting impact detonated the bomber's conventional explosives, The blast avoided a full nuclear yield, but the kinetic force ruptured 4 hydrogen bombs, scattering radioactive debris across a grid sector that was subsequently scrubbed from public coordinates. Today, the surrounding ice sheet appears pristine, but the historical inventory math from the cleanup never balanced. Manifests were stamped complete, and the recovery operation officially ceased. But the physical reality of the scattered payload dictated a discrepancy. A highly enriched uranium and lithium deuteride secondary stage had separated during the blast, falling through the shattered ice. The component remains unmapped in the seabed, its serial number permanently deleted from the final recovery log. Number 6. Grummet. The splintering wooden barracks have violently wedged into a shadowy gorge, pinched between a sheer rock wall and the freezing Arctic surge. Slowly, the shifting scree is swallowing the settlement whole, consuming the foundational beams as the mountain reclaims its footprint. The ocean does not hurry as it dissolves the lower platforms into the surf. 80 feet of rotting timber now hang suspended directly above the black tide. Ice patiently consumes the narrow, rotting bunks left in the dark. Hundreds of Soviet miners lived in these cramped, freezing conditions to extract coal directly from the punishing Arctic rock. According to Soviet mining archives from 1961, the outpost faced a terminal convergence of depleted coal seams and an increasingly hostile harbor. The logistical nightmare of loading transport ships in churning, ice-choked waters finally outweighed the value of the thinning rock. Nature did not crush the operation overnight. It simply outlasted the supply lines. When the final vessel departed that summer, it left the massive steel loading cranes to be slowly swallowed by the advancing permafrost. Row after row of empty black windows stare blankly out across the freezing waters of the fjord. Because the sheer terrain remains virtually inaccessible by land or sea, the settlement decays entirely without human interference. The slow, patient rot of the Arctic gradually consumes the wooden barracks, while encroaching permafrost buckles the remaining concrete foundations. Inside the collapsing structures, thick layers of undisturbed snow drift silently across the decaying floorboards. Number 5 is the North Pole 1 drift station. There is no land here to hold a monument, only shifting ice and dozens of submerged military bases, sealed beneath the freezing waterline. For exactly 274 days, Soviet scientists lived directly on a fractured slab of drifting sea ice. Inside thin canvas tents, warmed only by kerosene, they hammered instruments into the crust to measure the cold pressure of the submerged world beneath their boots. It was a fragile outpost of human warmth suspended over a freezing abyss. By the time the evacuation order arrived, their 3-meter-thick platform had dissolved into a fragment barely wide enough to hold the remaining equipment. The foundation simply began to tear apart. As contemporary expedition logs documented in 1938, the ice splintered under the cold pressure of the shifting ocean. Black water surged through the camp, physically separating the living quarters from the radio tent. When the twin icebreakers finally forced their way through the pack ice to execute the emergency rescue, the men were clustered on a shrinking raft. The original 3-kilometer runway was already sealed beneath the waterline. What stood as rigid grids of surface laboratories during the Cold War now lies scattered across the abyssal plain. Over the following decades, dozens of subsequent classified drift stations simply melted away. As the ice platforms thinned and fractured, tons of heavy machinery, sealed experimental enclosures, and power generators plummeted into the freezing depths. The remnants of these operations rest in the silt 4 kilometers down, submerged in total darkness. Number 4. Zhukov Island. Here, the frozen earth is dissolving. Slumping wooden huts lean at impossible angles as the thawing permafrost swallows their foundations. The dark soil is actively reclaiming what was built to conquer the Arctic, turning once solid ground into a treacherous, shifting mire. Out on this deeply isolated landmass, there is no stable footing left. The load-bearing timber snaps under the sheer weight of the collapsing mud. Where the collapsing tundra now threatens to swallow any misplaced footstep, a vital meteorological base once anchored high-latitude Soviet exploration. This outpost operated as the primary staging area for extreme polar deployments, tracking atmospheric pressure and ice drift before the permafrost began to fail. Today, the warming Earth actively consumes the remnants of that ambition, turning the wooden staging platforms into deadfall traps. The heavy iron anemometers are sinking directly into the expanding mud. In late 1991, the Soviet Union's collapse severed this outpost's lifeline overnight. According to declassified logistics summaries, the sudden funding freeze meant winter supply flights simply ceased. Politics and extreme terrain combined to force a desperate evacuation before the freeze locked them in. Today, the unmaintained structures are actively dissolving into the shifting earth. Meltwater consumes the wooden foundation blocks, accelerating a sudden structural failure that drops jagged, rusted steel directly into the thawing soil. Massive paw prints press deep into the snowdrifts, choking the main corridor. The thawing tundra has swallowed the perimeter fences, allowing the region's apex predators to fully claim the ruins. Polar bears now use the darkened, rusted labyrinth of the barracks as sheltered dens. Navigating these blind corners means stepping into a claustrophobic trap of oxidized steel and collapsing concrete. A 1,000-pound animal can move through these lightless bottlenecks without snapping a single decaying floorboard. Number 3. Cape Spear is a slow structural failure. Once built to shield a continent, these heavily fortified concrete batteries are now succumbing to relentless Atlantic gales and oxidized iron. Salt spray eats deep into the emplacements, stripping away the walls where hundreds of young soldiers once stood watch in the freezing dark. Where heavy artillery was anchored, only corroded rebar remains. The wind actively shears raw aggregate from the exposed firing positions. In the empty subterranean corridors, the quiet air holds the heavy chill of damp rock and oxidized steel. This artillery base was carved deep into the cliff to shield vulnerable Allied supply convoys from hunting German U-boat wolf packs. By the spring of 1945, the strategic calculus shifted permanently. According to declassified Canadian military logs, the collapse of the German submarine fleet rendered this coastal defense network obsolete. The massive guns were silenced and stripped for scrap, leaving the empty firing pits to slowly oxidize. The soldiers who manned these freezing stations departed in rapid waves, taking the warmth of human occupation with them. Today, only corroded steel mounting bolts remain embedded in the bare concrete. Beneath the oxidized gun mounts lies a lightless labyrinth. Corroded ventilation shafts connect pitch-black subterranean corridors, spaces once warmed by the daily routines of stationed men. Now, the structural failure of the outer bulkheads turns these tunnels into an acoustic funnel for North Atlantic gales. High-pressure air forced through jagged steel bends into auditory anomalies, mimicking distant klaxon alarms and muffled human shouts. The noise is entirely mechanical, generated by wind vibrating against miles of rusting iron pipe. Number 2. Inuvik terminals sits submerged in absolute silence. Tilted at unnatural 30-degree angles, the metallic geodesic spheres are slowly sealing beneath the cold pressure of the permafrost silt. Before they were sealed beneath a rising reservoir of freezing groundwater, these geodesic arrays operated as the advanced ears of a nervous continent. Packed with telemetry gear, the intercept stations were engineered to capture Soviet communications and track ballistic trajectories arcing over the pole. Today, miles of copper wiring and parabolic dishes sit in the dark, patiently outlasted by the slow creep of the terrain. The main intercept feeds remain severed beneath 3 feet of accumulating silt. The foundation did not crack, it dissolved. According to environmental monitoring reports from the late 1990s, the permafrost supporting these multi-ton arrays began to warm and destabilize. The frozen earth, once as rigid as concrete, transitioned into a saturated, silty swamp. Slowly, the heavy geodesic structures were swallowed by the softening ground, dragged downward by their own immense weight. Today, the primary radar footings rest permanently submerged beneath a creeping waterline. Jagged steel struts now pierce the encroaching silt at severe, unnatural angles. The descent is agonizingly slow, measured in fractions of an inch each season, as gravity and shifting soil mechanics drag the architecture downward. As the cold pressure of the earth warps the skeletal frames, the stressed metal continuously groans and shrieks in the Arctic wind. These acoustic vibrations travel through the exposed hollow tubes, converting the slow structural failure into a measurable, low-frequency hum. Number 1. Jan Mayen Island sits in the freezing dark. Out here, half-abandoned meteorological outposts remain ash-choked and battered by relentless Arctic storms. Wind-driven grit blasts against heat-warped window frames, stripping the exterior siding down to bare, carbonized wood. The physical hazard is immediate and constant. Hurricane-force squalls continually threaten to peel away the remaining roof panels, while the eastern walls bear a 2-inch crust of hardened, ember-scarred soot. Originally engineered to guide aircraft through freezing kicks, the navigation outpost now sits, slowly cooking from the ground up. The facility was strategically built on the lower flanks of Beerenberg, the world's northernmost active subaerial volcano. Heat-warped sensor masts angle awkwardly toward the summit crater, while sulfurous fumes bleed directly into the carbonized air intake vents. Active seismometers continue to measure localized magma tremors vibrating through the blackened basalt just beneath the floorboards. The evacuation allowed no time for protocol. According to declassified Norwegian military logs, a sudden fissure forced an immediate retreat, driven by a combination of advancing lava and choking atmospheric conditions. The physical risk is still immediate as searing ash and unstable terrain shift around the remaining structures. Half of the primary generator block sits entombed beneath hardened, ember-scarred pumice. The main blast doors are fused shut by 3 meters of solid igneous rock. Outside, the Arctic wind drives temperatures below zero. Yet inside these carbonized hallways, the air is suffocatingly hot. Of everything on this list, this is the environment I find hardest to explain. Active geothermal vents now breach the foundation, flooding the ash-choked corridors with pressurized, hissing sulfuric steam. The extreme temperature differential creates a blinding fog where freezing ice melt meets boiling gas. Droplets of acidic condensation pool constantly over the heat-warped floor gratings.